And I think that takes us nicely into respecting other people's model of the world. Now, we use that an awful lot in NLP, don't we? And that's one that I think a lot of people struggle to take on board.
I think so. It's probably one that's quite easy to pay lip service to, isn't it? In a way that you go, oh yeah, of course I respect their other map of the world, but really all you're wanting to do is try and bring them round to yours.
So there's that thing. There's that situation, isn't there, where we have a belief about something, and we absolutely believe that we're right. So I'm right, 100%. I'm right. And you have an opposing view to that. So I'm going to go into a seemingly open conversation with you, really with the assumption that I'm going to drag you across to my map, my understanding of the situation. And one that I think is very topical at the moment is the vaccination program and the booster program for COVID. And I think if we can talk a little bit around this, not necessarily the vaccination program, but if we can talk a little bit about respecting other people's model of the world and how we can then look at that situation and then work out, what is your start point of getting somebody to understand what you would like them to try and understand about your view. So what's your take on that?
I think it's so important because I'm trying to stop myself from almost bringing other ones into it as well, because so I mean where I really layer these up is that everyone is working from a positive intent. So all behaviour comes from a place of a positive intent.
That's a crunchy one in itself.
To that person, from their map of the world, in that time, in that state that they were in right there, and that's the thing. I think you have to understand that there's a level of complexity to that, in that sense that if someone is in a highly agitated state, then their map of the world is going to be different to if they're in a very relaxed state for that one thing in that one context at that point of time. And I think with something that tends to get polarized, and it doesn't matter what it is. I mean, you're absolutely right saying about vaccinations for COVID, but it can be any number of different things where there's polarization, and let's not get into how the press encourage that and so on. But I think having trying to understand someone's map of the world is different to just respecting that they have it. Because it's easy enough to just say, oh yeah, I respect, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but and then they go in with, this is why you should think in this way. When you try and really understand, so if you take that vaccinations one to be specific about that, if you've got someone that lives, so if I think of a couple of friends, one of my friends has just moved to Australia. He's in farming. He used to be not too far from here, actually. He was between Salisbury and Romsey, around that way. And so for him, the whole process of lockdown made really no difference. He said, I've gone from being sat in a tractor in a field on my own most of the time to being sat on a tractor in the middle of a field on my own most of the time. And so it was no different. So for someone like that, how is their perception of going to change much throughout that process? Whereas if someone else is, say, for example, has got a job in a testing centre, one of the mobile roadside ones or something like that, and all they're seeing every single day is people coming in and being tested, that's going to have an effect on it. It's in the same way as if you had a pub and your pub has been shut down and you can no longer trade, you'll have a very different perception to someone whose business has doubled or tripled during that time period.
And I think that's really useful to think about that. I think it was Stephen Covey said, didn't he, that seek to understand first and then be understood. And I think if we could really think about that when you go into any discussion with somebody, any debate with someone, to understand, not agree, not necessarily agree, that's not the same thing, to understand their viewpoint before you actually put in your viewpoint. I think that is so, I do think that, you know, me included, I think, you know, and I think you said earlier on that, you know, it's happened to you as well. We'll go in something we're passionate about and we'll go into a discussion with somebody about it. And you really are going into it initially with, no, I'm right, I know I'm right. But we check ourselves because we are so fortunate to have this deep understanding of NLP and these presuppositions. And if we then take a virtual step back, a deep breath, and then seek to understand first. So you re-enter the room, if you will, and then say, so where are you coming from? What do you think? And if we could do that, I think that's one of the, you know, the presuppositions that I think is so liberating.
Yeah. Well, that happens on a big scale as well. I mean, what it makes me think of is back to times of the empire and Commonwealth growing and how we, you know, quote unquote liberated so many countries, you know, because we know better. It's like, oh no, you don't want to live your life like this, you're doing it wrong, you want to do it this way. And of course then after so many years it you know, got the empire out and they reverted back to exactly how that country was run before and how they wanted to run, you know. And I'm not saying it was always the case like that, because of course some countries were desperate and very pleased for what was considered to be help. But that can happen on a national and international scale. So if you then bring that down to a conversation that you have with someone, and we've all done it, you know, I'll put my hands up to it as much as you would as well, and anyone else probably, saying, how many times have you had a conversation with someone where you're just thinking, oh, I'll get them to see this the right way in a moment. Not my way, the right way. You know, it's a very absolute way of thinking, isn't it?
But I think kicking around the edges of that and really opening that up is so useful for people. If at very least they could take away something, is to understand first, to seek to understand before, you know, before expecting to be understood. And I think that's a really
I think it is a brilliant phrase, and I think it's one that it's from 7 Habits, wasn't it?
Yes, 7 Habits of Successful, highly successful.
Really good stuff. And I think it is so important, because a lot of times in a conversation, what people are doing, I don't know, we're saying what people, we're making loads of gross generalisations here. I appreciate that. But
we all do.
We all do that, of course we do. It can be very easy to just simply listen in order to just make it your turn, rather than really listening to understand someone and really understand where they're coming from. And that can be, to have your mind changed about something can be really powerful for you, as in the person receiving, having your mind changed. And especially if you've done it from a point of view of just talking and as you say, trying to understand where someone else is coming from. Suddenly you start seeing how things overlap, and that maybe, just maybe, you might find that you weren't opposites as you might thought you were, but you link in, you've got the same values or a lot of the same values, and you think, you're just trying to do the same thing as I am, but from a different way, you know. It's really powerful.
It is powerful, and I think, you know, in particularly in coaching, when you use it in coaching, and quite often the person that is absolutely adamant of what they're saying, they believe that they've done that for that reason and it's been right. And, you know, in opening up the conversation and asking them again, so just so that I can understand. And, you know, I've had these eureka moments, and I'm sure you have, in sessions where the client will say, actually, that sounded crap, what I've just said. Did I believe that?
Yeah.
Well, okay, let's run it past again. And it's just so lovely, it's so liberating. And like you say, to have your opinion changed, your mind changed by thinking of something a different way is, I think, incredible. And to if nothing else, to respect, going back to the number one thing, respect that they have that model of the world, they have their own take on it. I love that.